They vanished. And no one questioned it. Sheets untouched. Beds empty. A silence heavier than the walls. But why her? The orders arrived without explanation. Not through telegram. Not a letter. Just a name on a list. Doctor. Report immediately. Shouldn't have been her job. She wasn't trained for this. She had no choice. Every officer she passed avoided. Eye contact. Every step toward the camp felt wrong, yet necessary. What would happen if she refused? No one would answer. The camp was quiet, but not peaceful. It was a silence that pressed down on her chest. Heavy and alive, every footstep echoed. Every whisper felt amplified, yet she could not hear them clearly. She walked the hallways, felt the walls watching her. Her hands shook as she checked the supplies. Not for herself, but for them, the prisoners she barely knew. Am I helping them? Or am I part of something else? She thought every decision felt like stepping on a hidden trap. She questioned everything. Sleep was a stranger. Nights stretched endlessly. She lay in her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to nothing and everything at once. The clatter of trays in the mess hall seemed distant but ominous. A cough somewhere in the camp made her jump. Even when she knew she was alone, she noticed tiny details. A bed slightly moved. A guard's unusual pause. Every anomaly gnawed at her mind. Should she ask questions? Would asking make her a target? She could feel the moral weight of silence pressing on her shoulders. Her mind replayed the orders over and over. Report immediately. No explanation. No reason. Only obedience. She imagined the faces of those who vanished before her arrival. Were they here now? Or gone forever? The uncertainty twisted inside her, coiling tighter each day. Time blurred. Minutes stretched, then vanished. Her reflection in a window looked like a stranger. She wondered if fear was changing her, reshaping her thoughts, her judgments, her instincts. Every choice became a question. Every action a risk. She tried to focus on the work, on what was expected of her. But the silence, the glances, the absence of answers, they grew heavier, deeper, impossible to ignore. She was trapped in a moral labyrinth with no exit. The routines began to warp. Breakfast came late. The guard's footsteps were uneven, almost hesitant, as if they, too, were holding back secrets. She noticed that the same soldier who once stood rigid at the gate now paused mid-step, glanced over his shoulder, then continued. Nothing was said. Nothing explained. A prisoner's bed was moved overnight. The sheets were crisp, untouched, yet something about its placement made her stomach twist. She walked the halls and saw things she couldn't name. A shadow where none should be. A door left open, then closed by itself. The air felt thicker in some rooms, colder in others. It was subtle at first. So subtle, she almost convinced herself she was imagining it, but the tension grew. Small deviations multiplied. The predictable became strange. Every time she tried to rationalize it, another detail shattered her explanation. She kept silent. Speaking seemed dangerous, pointless even. Her eyes absorbed everything, her mind cataloging the anomalies. The camp felt alive, not with people, but with expectation. With anticipation of something unspoken, the anomalies escalated. The lights flickered at odd times, casting long, jittering shadows along the walls. She heard distant murmurs in hallways that should have been empty. Some prisoners whispered to one another and then abruptly stopped, as if they had remembered she was there. Other voices returned, changed, quieter, hollowed, cautious, as though each word carried a hidden weight. Objects shifted. Notes disappeared. Tools misplaced. No one admitted noticing. No one explained. It was as though the camp itself was collecting secrets, and she was the only one aware of its quiet accumulation. Time began to feel warped. They could stretch endlessly. Hours blurred together. She lost track of when she had arrived, of what day it was, or whether she had slept at all, every moment carried the sense of impending consequence. Though she could not identify what would trigger it, the invisible rules became clearer only in their unpredictability. She could feel a pattern forming. Just beyond her understanding, a slight hesitation in a guard's movement, a repeated sound, a cough, a footstep, a whisper that never seemed to belong to a person. Each repetition pulled at her mind, demanding attention, creating a slow, unrelenting pressure. Her heart raced even in stillness. Every choice seemed simultaneously necessary and forbidden. The anomalies no longer just disturbed her, they haunted her. A single sound repeated over and over. The scrape of boots, a door creaking, a faint cough. She could not locate the source. She could not predict the next occurrence. Each repetition was slightly different, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make her question her senses. She began noticing details that should not have mattered. A shadow in a corner that lingered too long. A flicker of light that didn't correspond to any lantern. A piece of paper she had just seen now missing. Her mind cataloged these inconsistencies compulsively, but the list never ended. Every time she thought she understood a pattern, the camp shifted subtly again. Predictability became impossible. Certainty, a memory. Prisoners avoided her gaze more than ever. A glance in her direction seemed to startle them. Even though nothing had changed, sometimes she caught a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, too fast to identify, too deliberate to ignore. Her own reflection in a polished table or a window sometimes appeared slightly delayed. As if the image itself was aware of her presence, she began repeating small actions obsessively, checking beds, notes, supplies, not for utility, but for reassurance. The reassurance never came. Each repetition only emphasized the strangeness of the environment, the absence of explanation, and the growing weight of anticipation. The camp seemed to hold its breath. Time was not linear. Hours bled into each other. A day might stretch endlessly, or a moment might snap by in a heartbeat. She could no longer distinguish between night and day, order and chaos. Her senses became hypersensitive. A whisper too soft, a shadow too long, a glance too sharp, all were amplified into signals she could not decode. The psychological lock tightened. She could not act freely. Every decision carried invisible consequences. Even stillness felt like a choice, one that could trigger unseen outcomes. Her mind circled endlessly around questions that had no answers. Why is this happening? What am I missing? What will happen if I step out of line? And yet, she could not leave. Every step deeper into the camp pulled her further into the web of anomalies. The invisible pattern, whatever it was, had claimed her attention completely. Her fear became internalized, a slow-burning awareness that the camp was alive in ways that were not meant to be explained. Even those who survived the event seemed different. They walked more slowly, eyes avoiding direct contact. A glance at her caused tremors in their shoulders. Subtle but undeniable, conversations became fractured. Words hesitated midair, swallowed before they could be spoken. No one acknowledged her presence fully. When she asked about incidents she knew occurred, the answers were vague, distracted, or outright denial. Nothing happened, one whispered, almost afraid he had said too much. Don't remember that, muttered another. Avoiding her gaze entirely, she began noticing subtle physical cues, slight stiffening at the mention of certain rooms, fingers lingering over papers that didn't exist, quick head turns at distant sounds. These were not random actions. They were echoes of an unspoken understanding. A silent pact enforced by fear. The hospital, once a place of sterile routine, now breathed tension. Corridors seemed longer, doors heavier, and the air itself thickened. Even small details like a chair left askew, or a bed slightly out of place, felt charged with meaning. The camp had erased the events, but their effects lingered. Her footsteps seemed louder than before, carrying her own anxiety into every room. Every sound was magnified. A door creaking, the shuffle of boots, a distant cough. It was as if the very walls remembered what records denied. The erasure extended beyond the physical. She began questioning her own sanity. Had it all been real? Or had her fear conjured events that never truly happened? No one would confirm or deny. Her memory became a fragile archive of forbidden knowledge. She held pieces of a story no one else could validate. The camp's silence became a cage, enclosing her within her own recollection. The weight of unspoken horrors pressed upon her each day. It grew heavier each night. She revisited every detail, every sound. Every absence, her mind became a theater of shadows, playing scenes that could never be recorded, never shared, never explained. Years later, she would think back on that time. The memories were vivid, yet fragmented. The people she helped, the events she witnessed, the rules she followed, all seemed suspended between reality and erasure. Even the prisoners' faces were sometimes blurred in her mind, as if the camp had deliberately smudged them. She carried the knowledge, the fear, and the moral weight alone. And she understood, finally, that some events were meant to be erased. Some stories were designed to survive. Only in the quiet memory of a single witness, the camp had erased records, voices, and traces, but it could not erase the experience, nor the moral questions she would carry for a lifetime. She stood at the edge of the camp. One final time, the gates loomed behind her, silent and unchanged. No one spoke. No one acknowledged her presence. The wind whispered through the empty courtyards, carrying echoes she could barely recognize. She remembered the faces, the prisoners whose names had been erased, the guards, whose actions had been recorded nowhere, the small acts of care that vanished without acknowledgement. And she realized, no one else would remember. History would record the camp as ordinary, but she could never forget. Why her? Why send a single doctor into a place so laden with silence, fear, and moral ambiguity? What was the purpose of obedience without understanding? No answer came. The questions hovered unresolved, as if the camp itself had swallowed them. She questioned human nature. Was fear stronger than compassion? Was silence a tool or a punishment in itself? Could memory preserve truth when all records had been erased? The moral weight pressed down on her shoulders. Not anger, not relief, just the slow, lingering sense that something profound had occurred, something invisible yet undeniable. She walked slowly through the corridors, now empty and still. A single beam of light cut across the floor. She paused, looking at it, noticing dust motes suspended like memories in the air. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Yet everything remained, not in records, not in words, not in history, but in her mind. Her final step out of the camp echoed softly, a sound swallowed by silence. The gates closed behind her. She carried the story alone. And somewhere, deep in the empty halls, the camp continued to exist indifferent, unrecorded, yet profoundly altered.